Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Those of you that attempted to be a part of this conversation a few days ago, sorry that there were weather and technical issues, but we're back. I'm here with my friend Kelly Rosati. Kelly is an attorney. She's the CEO of KMR Consulting. I have to read this because I don't have this memorized. She's the former vice president of advocacy for children at Focus on the Family. She and her husband have adopted their 4 children from foster care, and they have had 12 years of parenting experiencing children with serious mental illness, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. They have sadly had experience with 7 psychiatric hospitals and residential facilities in 5 states, which has given their family a passion for other families that are facing similar circumstances. So welcome, Kelly. I'm so glad that you're with us. Thank you for making time a second time to have this conversation.
My pleasure. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. I wish that we had known each other through something completely different besides, serious mental illness. I wish that it was through the love of the Rocky Mountains where you live, or those incredible horses that you have, but God has brought us together through suffering in the lives of our kids and caring for other kids. So thank you so much. I wanted to just talk a little bit with the audience about suicide in teenagers, because unfortunately it is on the rise. Suicide is the #2 killer of children between the ages of 10 and 24, which is just phenomena. I mean, it's so heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, and there's so much to say about that. I'm not going to say a whole lot about that because we really want to focus today on some of the practical reasons, but it is on the rise, and some people have said there's an epidemic, and yet I've learned through my work as a suicide prevention advocate that that's really a term we want to avoid, mostly because it gives kids, students, adults the impression that, oh, this is really common. This happens a lot, and therefore this is a good option for you if you end up in that feeling that hopelessness. And we want to always give the message of, no, that is not so. It is still fortunately rare. It's just increasing. But it is going up. And if any of you that are listening or watching and you want a 1-page downloadable free document that will give you some statistics about suicide, help you know the warning signs if your teen is perhaps giving you some signs and signals, and also it also tells you what are some of the things that make teenagers more vulnerable to suicidal thoughts, and it also has some language to use. And so there's a 1-page downloadable that you'll see in the notes. But Kelly, enough just about me talking about that, because I want us to talk for our time together about when your teen is in serious crisis or when your teen is having suicidal thoughts. I was thinking the first time I experienced that with Matthew, which I'll talk about in a minute, but what might be one of the first times for you? Or maybe just tell us a little bit more about your family before we get into that practical question.
Sure. Well, as you said, Kate, we were super blessed that God brought our kids through foster care adoption. And so when they experienced really significant trauma in their very young lives, in utero, several of them were born addicted to drugs and fetal alcohol exposed. And we know from the neuroscience now that just does a number on our kids, and that it's almost impossible that there will not be ramifications because of the way that the brain is injured during that trauma. So we knew going into it that was something that we would probably have to face. And we also knew that there was mental illness in our kids' birth families. But I have to tell you, even knowing all of that, I think in my mind, if I'm really honest, I just thought, oh, but that won't be us. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a sense of protection or what it is, but I can say at the same time I was fully aware and also completely clueless. And so we kind of got into those middle school years, and mental illness for the first time began to emerge with one of our kids. And it was very, very serious bipolar disorder. And it manifested in violence and extreme mood swings and almost complete debilitation. And we were completely undone. We had no idea what was happening, what to do. we were going day to day in complete survival mode. And honestly, when our child would kind of weep in my arms and express thoughts of not wanting to be alive, what I felt was pure terror. And so on my inside, it was a terror like I had never known, and a despairing and a franticness, while on the outside trying to maintain a calm and an upbeat and really not knowing what we would walk into. And so we've had 3 kids who have dealt with suicidality and have experienced suicide attempts, some of them in psychosis. We have one son with schizophrenia, and a feature of that is debilitation with audio and visual hallucinations that put him into a psychosis that makes him very at risk for suicide.
And
I would say terror.
I just want to pause and say on the other day when we made our first attempt to do this conversation, you made it clear to the audience that your kids have given you permission to talk. So just tell us that real quickly so that nobody's worried that you're violating your kids' privacy.
Yes, no, I really appreciate that, because that is important. All of our kids, as we have come through these challenges, I think, like us, have felt like we are going to see meaning and some good come out of this by trying to be open and help other people that are experiencing really the hell, okay, that you and your family and that our family has gone through. It's hell on earth. And boy, oh boy, it gives great meaning to be able to help others. And our kids have been very explicit that they say, go mom, do your thing. You can talk, you can tell our stories if it will help somebody else.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
You used a term that some people might, if they've not walked down this road, might find extreme or might find it rather melodramatic. You said it's hell, and I completely agree. I wrote a Facebook post a year or so ago that I called Living on the Edge of Hell. And that's one of the conversations you and I had early on, was just how hellish it is to have a child that you love with your entire heart, and that you have done everything that you know to do, have sought all the mental health help, all the medication help, all the therapy help, all the adjunct type things, all the
spiritual help.
The prayers that you've prayed, all the Bible verse believing you have done, all the on your face crying in the night for your child, and still know that they are facing an illness that will eat them alive if something doesn't happen. And so I call that living on the edge of hell. You've described it. And so for anybody who's watching or listening, we get that. We've walked it, and it's a pretty accurate description. So Kelly, you're for me, Matthew was around the same age when I first realized that he was having suicidal thoughts. It was a Mother's Day, and he was about 12, and he'd had a really hard day, and I knew it was a hard day, and he was already struggling with severe depression, and that night when I tucked him into bed, I've told this story before, I tucked him into bed, and in the quiet, I'm getting ready to say, good night, buddy, I love you. And as I'm getting ready to walk out, he asked me if I would kill him and put him out of his misery. And I was just so glad that the room was dark and that he couldn't see my face, and he couldn't see the tears that began instantly to pour down my face, and how I managed to somehow stumble through words of, buddy, it breaks my heart to know that you are struggling, so that you are in so much pain. I love you with all my heart, and God is going to help us get through this. And he let that, he didn't challenge it any further. And I remember going outside of his door and just almost running into his older brother who was in the hallway, and just collapsing in his arms and sobbing, thinking, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't hear my child live with that kind of suffering. And so I know that you've done it many, 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 many times. And you already said your first reaction was terror. Do you remember anything that you said in those moments, or to one of your kids when you first began to realize they were struggling with suicidal thoughts?
Well, I think that what I learned is what you just said, Kay. The most important thing is for parents who might be listening is that however panicked you are and however terrorized you are and however upset you might be because you don't understand, you haven't yet come along, to the place where you see how much they're suffering. The most important thing in my estimation is uber nurture. And that no matter what, when your kids express any kind of emotional anguish, when they have taken the risk to share with you that they are suffering, that they are never shamed or blamed or judged or lectured, but that they are nurtured and that every ounce of the love of Christ that is in you flow through you to them. And if nothing else from our time together, Kay, gets through to people, I would say that is the main message. And it's not always easy. You might hear this and think, well, of course that would be the case. But sometimes, for some of my kids, it was always very easy because of the way they express the pain. But for another one of my kids who expressed the pain in a way that's probably much more or much less sympathetic. Maybe it's more acting
more
out and it's
behavioral.
more
Yeah.
and it's more behavioral difficulty. It's very natural to be frustrated and upset and, with your inside, with your inside voice to be like, get a grip, you have a great life, those things are all very normal, but keep them in your inside voice as much as you can. And if you've messed up, we've all messed up. But from this point forward, nurture and love for your kids who are struggling will take you much farther than anything else. What they need.
Yeah, you and I talked about also how for us the struggle was so long. It was over. He was 7 when he was diagnosed with depression, and 27 when he died by suicide. So we had 20 years of his illness just waxing and waning, but always it felt like on a downward trajectory where he was getting worse and then try to rally and then he'd get worse. And it was just so long and difficult and painful for him and for us. And there were people who told me that, that we need to practice tough love and that might mean, I don't know, I heard it through my lens as kicking him to the curb. Like if you can't get this together, if you're not going to take your medication, if you're not going to, especially as he got older, if you're not going to do this, then, I'm closing my heart to you. I don't want anything to do with you. And what I've often said is that I could see where maybe teachers have to have, they've got to have some boundaries in a classroom. I could see a school has to have boundaries. I understand that. I think families also have to have boundaries for safety. But I think there's something about a heart attitude that says, you are my child. You are my child. And the rest of the world may have the luxury of telling you to get lost or that you need to do X, Y, Z. But I am your parent, and I will probably, and I always did, kind of err more on the side of nurture and compassion and understanding than I did on the side of, rule following, and there will be this and there will be that. And it's such a delicate balance. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is it's a little out of order of the questions that we've talked about ahead of time, but I think this is apropos right here, is how to help a child who is struggling so deeply can create a lot of conflict between parents because Rick and I came at it really differently. And there were times that we just had terrible conflict of he would want to do this and I would want to do that. And he would come from this place and I would come from this place. And, talk to us about that a little bit. Some of those conflict things that come up in parenting.
Sure. Well, 2 things about conflict. I'm so glad you brought it up. The first I want to say to people is that you may be surprised, but going through something like this, people automatically, especially, for example, if there's drug addiction involved or alcohol addiction on co-occurring with the mental illness,
yes,
there's a lot of parent-to-child conflict that tends to occur. I'm here to say, by the grace of God alone, we really didn't experience this, and I want to give hope for parents. And And it's not because in the midst of our nurture, we never had a boundary. We did have some boundaries. And our son has given me permission to talk about this, but our son with schizophrenia also had become addicted to street drugs when he was a teenager. And, you were so helpful to me, Kay, in the midst of this. I could just about cry thinking about it. But, we just had that. What do we do? And we're never going to tough love him and kick him out of our heart. And the relationship was always good. But because we stayed very nurturing and we never yelled at him, believe me, we wanted to. Early on we probably did. But, when the time these things
once you understood.
Yeah, we didn't yell. We were very loving and nurturing when we had to be firm. And he actually experienced homelessness for a time because he wanted to use drugs. And we said, and he loved us and we loved him and we hugged and he walked off the property.
Wow.
Because he wanted to go use drugs. And I thought I might die, Kay, of heartache. I can still remember him just walking off our property, his backpack. And he went and lived on the streets for a while. And we almost lost him so many times. But it took that when he decided he wanted to be clean and he got into a program. Then when he was in the program, he had a terrible schizophrenia episode. They wouldn't let him back in the program. And it was at that time we said, what are we going to do? We have other kids at home. It's all of that difficulty. But one thing that we were clear about, and you helped me with this, Kay, was we said we are not going to be homeless because he's ill. And so the reason they weren't letting, he had been doing a great job with with the things he could control. And so we brought him home. And I'm thrilled to say to you that after a few years from that point now, he is 19 and he is clean and sober. He goes to Celebrate Recovery. Thank you, Saddleback Church. And he also is doing better with his schizophrenia because of some medicine updates. And so I would say on the conflict side, I got a little sidetracked there, don't assume you're going to have conflict with your child, because if you can frame things always in terms of you're going to go to the ends of the earth to get them the help that they need, and you're going to be there for them, as you said, Kay, we are never leaving or forsaking our kids.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, they come to realize who is there for them and who isn't.
Yeah.
Because you may have some kids that are in with a bad crowd, and they might think when they're teenagers that their buddies that they're with are their true family. That they're going to come through that. That doesn't last. It all shows for what it is. So, and then on the parent-to-parent conflict, I would say for us, we had less conflict. My husband John and I had less conflict with one another. But what we did have was a complete deterioration of our relationship, because the only way we related to one another now was as like co-managers of mental health that we were running. Yeah. And so that took a real toll.
Oh, it takes serious mental illness takes such a toll on relationships within families. As you say, parent to parent, parents with other children in the home. So let's talk about that for just a minute. So what do you say for when your other kids might not be going through a crisis? Maybe one child is going through a crisis and the other kids are not. For us, Matthew was our youngest, and when my older two lived their entire lives with a younger brother that had serious mental illness, and it's really only since his passing that we've had some conversations in which they've felt free enough to talk to me about the effects of living with a seriously mentally ill sibling, and the times they felt neglected, the times they felt that he got all the attention, the times that they even felt as they grew into adulthood that maybe we weren't taking always the approach they would take. And so it caused conflict, even between us and our other kids. And they are so amazing and they are so gracious and they have their own stories to tell. But all I can point out is that it's not unusual for there to be some pretty serious conflict in the family when there is a mentally ill sibling. Now, you have the situation of several children with mental illness. So even if one is not having a crisis, another one could be. And so how you juggle all that even between them is something. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, that is very tricky, and you laid it out perfectly in terms of the dynamics that occur when whichever kids are feeling healthy and then the others are sick. So it is very much a triage. You know, I want parents to know you're doing the best you can, and you just have to do what's in front of you. And so when you have a child in front of you who is facing a life and death situation, you do have to address that. I do think incredible openness and communication is essential. And the other thing for us is we've all been in therapy forever. And
Thank
so
God for
we
therapy.
knew, yes, thank God for good therapists. We knew, for example, so 3 of our 4 have had, again, very serious schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Our youngest is actually away at a residential facility at the moment. And then we have another child, a son who's now 16, who has never had any of these kinds of issues. And so I am kind of in awe of how he has navigated his entire life. We, again, because we're very open and honest, we encourage our kids to say the hard things, and they do. They have really learned, and I'm so proud of them. They have learned to say really anything to each other. And they say it, you know, we all strive for this. We don't do it perfectly, but strive to say it respectfully and kindly,
Yeah.
but to say the hard stuff too. And I think the biggest issue, Kay, I don't know if you had this, but I think the biggest issue is when you're dealing with mental illness, which is invisible, of course, you always have the situation with outsiders for sure, but even within the family with siblings where people can't tell if somebody's just sick or if they're behaving badly.
Or if
And
you're just
so
a bad
there's
parent.
yeah. So there's always
if you were just a better parent, your child wouldn't be having these
Right.
problems. Yeah.
Yes, right. And so we talk about things like, and try to use analogies. I recall we would say, you know, if one of our family members were using a wheelchair and and bumped into us in the wheelchair because they're in a wheelchair, we're obviously not going to be mad at them about that
That's
conduct. And so try as we could to kind of use those analogies where they could grasp it more, because it is so invisible and it is hard to tell. And the behavior is sometimes indistinguishable from bad behavior. But then we can always come back and talk about the fact that, while it might be frustrating for our son without mental illness, how much worse, you know, he has a compassion for them, and he is thankful that he doesn't have to suffer the way that they suffer.
Yeah.
So I would say open communication, don't be afraid, don't be shut down, and get a lot of therapy.
I think that's one of the things. Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the therapy because honestly, I feel like I've paid for, you know, a therapist island off in the, you know, Mediterranean somewhere with all the therapy that dollars I have spent. I keep saying, what's the name of my island that you bought with money? But totally believe in therapy. I also realize that can be prohibitive for folks if they don't have good medical insurance, or if they're using, you know, public assistance. That can be very, very tricky. And we can talk about that in a minute. But absolutely therapy. I wish that now looking back, my kids are, you know, much older than your kids, growing up with their own kids. And looking back, I wish that we had understood more about what you just talked about that open communication, using analogies that would draw a comparison between, you know, a physical illness and a brain illness. And I think that, like your kids, my kids developed deep compassion for people who suffer, and they had deep compassion for their brother. But I just wish that we as parents had known how to talk, had been able to frame things. I think we lived in denial for a really long time because Matthew's illness kind of gradually got worse and worse. I think we just kept thinking he's going to outgrow this. Surely the next doctor we go to will have an answer. Won't the next medication that he takes be the one that gets him to a normal or a baseline that we long for him? And because we kept waiting for that to happen, which never did really happen, I don't think we dealt with it within our family as helpful a way as we could have. It sounds like maybe because your kids had serious mental illness pretty early on, if I'm understanding you right. So you were kind of thrown into the lion's den really quickly, and you guys had to go, no, this is serious. We have to make some adjustments. We've got to figure this out between us. And I wish I wish that we had known a little better about that. Let me ask you about, you said that that your kids, several of them have been hospitalized repeatedly. So just give us like what to expect. I know there's residential treatment, which a couple of your kids have done, and then some have they all done residential? The three, have they all done residential? Okay, well, you probably didn't start at residential, right?
Right. All three have done acute involuntary holds that happen when you're a danger to yourself or others. And then all three have also done residential as a follow-on to that because of the severity of
so walk us through, for maybe a parent who doesn't really know what's that trajectory look like? Or, I mean, obviously it's individual, each child is going to be different, but what happens like in a mental health involuntary hold? And then what happens what point do you decide, residential might be what we're going to need to do? Talk to us about that.
Okay, I'll start with the acute side, the kind of emergency side. And what I would say to parents about this is, particularly, Kay, as you mentioned, in this day and age, with kind of the climate that we have around suicide in schools and just what's happening, is just don't play. And if your kid expresses suicidal intentions, do not diminish it and take it very seriously. And again, the minute they do, you want to remember, go full throttle nurture, and then always frame things in terms of, we're going to get the help that you need so you can feel better and be home and be healthy and happy. I feel like so much trouble was avoided by that frame. And mentioned to you over the weekend, Kay, that I actually was talking with two of my kids who were sitting in the living room as I was trying to counsel a mom. And I said to them, why did you never feel abandoned? Because that's a big issue, particularly if you're parenting kids from trauma and adoption. And so why didn't you feel abandoned? And they said, well, Mom, because you always said, we both always said, we're going to get what you need for you so you can get home and get healthy. And I would encourage parents to think about it that way. If their kids had something wrong with their kidney or their liver, what are you going to do as a good parent? You're going to move heaven and earth to get your kids the kidney or the liver treatment that they need. You're not going to try to give them the kidney or liver treatment. Liver doctor. Same is true for this. A lot of people think if they just parented better, everything would be okay. But when your kids are this sick and they express suicidal intention, take it seriously. What I encourage people to do immediately is, if that happens, first of all, line of sight supervision. Do not let that child out of your sight. I recommend going to an emergency room and getting an evaluation. What the emergency room will do is decide if the child, through an assessment, poses an immediate threat to themselves or to somebody else. And so sometimes what will happen is the facility will put an involuntary hold, and your child will go into a safe lockdown psychiatric hospital. At least in my state, it's for 3 days.
Same in California.
Okay. You'll feel like the world has come to an end. It is the most horrible feeling in the whole wide world. I just want to encourage parents that if you go through it, that feeling will pass. It really will. And what you need to do then is to go home and sleep and thank God that they're safe, and then go through the process. And so I remember Kay's literally happened with our kids more times than I can't actually recall, because we've done it so often. And I always remember thinking, what is 3 days in here going to do? And there's a lot of fear. And so it's very easy to be completely consumed with fear of how are you going to keep them safe when they come home. And so what I would encourage people, particularly, I think this can be hard for Christians sometimes, is you can be real closed and suspicious of people who are trying to offer the help. And I just want to encourage people to be completely open and to cooperate with the therapist that's going to call you from the hospital and try to find out what's going on. It's a really icky feeling to have the people in the hospitals or to feel like the people in the hospitals think this is because you're a bad parent.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through it.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to say to people, like, it doesn't matter. At
Yeah.
this, at this juncture, none of that matters.
Right.
Just keep the nurture up, keep the love up, and cooperate and go through the process.
Yeah.
And they'll make sure before your child is discharged that there can be safety at home. They'll do the practical things like making sure meds are locked up and guns are locked up.
Legal means are not in the way.
Yeah. That's taken care of. Very important. And then there'll be a sense of just whether that child, what is their depression level. It's very, very scary. And I wish I could say, I wish I could say it isn't horrible.
Well, and before we talk about, before so you've tried the inpatient hospitalization several different times, and then you've also chosen residential treatment for your kids. So before we talk about that, I just want to make sure that there's a resource on my website, kwarren.com, that talks about when a loved one has been released from involuntary hospitalization. And so there's a section, we'll put the link up for you. So if you're a family member, parent and a child, maybe you're even thinking at some point, maybe I will have to take my child to an inpatient hospitalization. What happens when they come home? So there's a download, a PDF on how to help your family through following an inpatient hospitalization that we'll put the link up for that. So, Kelly, when and what made you and John decide that residential treatment might be necessary for a couple of your kids?
Yeah. Well, the first time we had to do it, again, I thought the world was coming to an end. And I don't really say that as hyperbole. Like, you really do feel like your worst living nightmare is here. And you're so scared about the wrong decision. And so for us, the first time was now, let's see, maybe 6 years or so ago, and it was with our one of our kids who was only 12, but we had about 4 straight years of daily constant violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm talking holes in the wall, blood drawn, having to hold a child down to keep them safe, child who would run, and the terror that is in you when your child runs. And literally, I just did not know how we could continue to cope. And so something really important happened, Kay. We had, again, maintained the relationship tightly through all of this. And we decided to frame things with this child of ours by saying, if certain behaviors are continuing, that's how we're going to know you need more help than we can give you at home. So it was always framed in terms of that, sweetheart, you are so sick. You know that. We know that. None of us want this. We know you're sick. We know you're not naughty. You're sick. I mean, you might be a little naughty, but that's not what's going on. You're sick. And so we had said there had come a point where this particular child of ours wouldn't get out of bed, like literally wouldn't leave the bed, and hadn't been to school for 4 years. And I was like, well, what are we going to do? We could try to pick her up and hold her down in the car and then dump her at the school. Like, it just wasn't tenable. The violence was too pervasive.
Right.
And so I'll never forget the moment we decided. So I had said to our child, if you can't get up and go to school, we're going to get you more help, because we're not going to leave you like this. We're going to find you help. And because of that, when we told that to our child, and when we dropped our child off, again, another point, I thought I would die from heartache, and wailed and sobbed like I didn't know I was capable of. That framing held firm, and it held for her, and it held for us. And there was constant contact. That's another big thing, constant contact when your child is in one of these places. Always talking about just working to get healthy so they can get home, so they can feel better. And that was the first time. there also comes a very palpable relief, I have to tell you. Part of the reason I think we waited too long to do it, honestly, I think we lived with violence in our home too long. And I think a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't wait so long. But I also had a terrible amount of guilt over how much relief I had, because I just felt, Kay, that I could not live one more day the way we had been living. Yeah. I was not going to make it myself. And my kids, my other kids, everybody needed me. I had a full-time job, focused on the family, and I didn't know how I could function. So when we made that decision, it was such a relief. I think I've told you this before. I actually had to drive away and go into the mountains of Colorado where we live and get a hotel room and just be in it by myself with no sound and no noise and no light. I was so undone by all of this that I felt almost incapable of functioning.
Extremely traumatic. I mean, extremely traumatic, that what you were experiencing.
Yeah, so I would encourage people, this is a total paradigm shift, but if you access emergency, acute short-term hospitalization, or if you access residential, if those are the right choices and they're big decisions, to think of them as incredible blessings that exist in the community to help kids who are really sick and who need more help than we can get them at home. And so I will say this about residential too, Kay. So not only did that stint helped that first time, it helped considerably. We still had a long road to go. We had suicide attempt and more residential after that with that particular child, and lots more residential with two of the other kids. But I believe that my kids are still here today in part because of being able to access residential services, where the way we say it around here, sometimes when your kids are so sick, they need an army kind of to guard them. They need a staff to keep them safe until they can get some healing. And families aren't staff. We're not facilities. And so for people who are struggling and they think that's failure and they think that's the worst thing in the world and that they're the most terrible parents, I just encourage you to say, that's wrong thinking. I know why you do it. I was there, but it's just not right thinking. And so be free to consider it and, prayerfully consider it with that frame of reference.
Because I can't think of anything much harder, for parents with children with serious mental illness, is that exact internal struggle of somehow I have failed, or we have failed as a family if our child needs residential treatment. And rather than understanding that the illness is profound and it's wreaking havoc in the child's life and body as well. I just want to put on the screen something called 211. And every community, almost every community in the United States has access to 211. So if you need mental health services, or it's like calling 411, we used to, before we had all the great services of the internet, you would call 411 and an operator would connect you to a business or a residence or whatever. 211 is a live person on the other end who will steer you in the right direction if you're looking for mental health care, if you're looking for physical care around homelessness, food banks. Every community has it. Please call 211 if you're not sure of where to get resources. And then the National Suicide Hotline. If your child is in a crisis and you need help right away, the 1-800-273-8255 is the national, or 273-TALK. So if someone is experiencing a suicidal crisis and they need to talk to someone, that's what I meant to say. If someone's experiencing a suicidal crisis and you need to talk to someone, or they need to talk to someone, if you feel like you need help immediately, you need to call 911 and get, there's something called the crisis intervention team or crisis assessment team. It depends on your community. But these are trained first responders who will come to your home or wherever you are and help assess whether your loved one is in an emergency and needs immediate, maybe transport. maybe they are refusing to go get help, but you know they're a danger to themselves or danger to others. If you call 211, they can connect you, give you the number of the crisis intervention team or crisis assessment team in your area. And then for teenagers, this is something that you might want to give to your teen who is struggling. There is the teen line. There's one, it's a nationwide number. It's here in California, but it's nationwide, and it's 310-855-HOPE. 310-855-HOPE. And that is a teen line that is staffed by trained teenagers. It's open from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every day. And it's been running since 1980. So here are teens talking to teens to be able to give them, and they're not counselors. They're just, let's talk. Sometimes teens will talk better to another teen than they will to an adult. So the teen line is a really good resource. We'll also put some links to some books for parents that are more about the long term. We're talking about crisis right now, but there are some good books and websites and things to look at. So Kelly, how do you build a team around your child with serious mental illness? What does that look like? Because you as parents, obviously we couldn't do it all, and you can't do it all. So what advice or what have you found helpful or not helpful even about building a team around your child that's struggling?
Yeah, I have to say that we have not done a good job of that, I would say, because it's really difficult. People don't understand. You're so frazzled, you really don't have time to explain to all your relatives and your friends who think you ought to just give them a good spanking and get a little bit more disciplinarian and say a few more Bible verses and say a few more prayers as if we haven't cried our eyes out to God every day for our children. So it can be really tough. So just know that if you're listening and you're in the middle of this and you're feeling so alone, and we understand it really is hard. I would say in the times where you have a little bandwidth, it is worth trying to do that. We've had a couple dear friends that have just been incredible. I remember one night we tried to go out for maybe the first time in years we've been able to get away alone, because we just couldn't ever, not one of us, be with one of the kids. And so we were gone, and we had a good family dear friend who's walked with us this whole way. And my son had a very terrible schizophrenia episode, and to the point where I was on the phone and just we were racing home in the car, because he'd actually had a knife to his throat, and she had to throw an object across the room to try to kind of snap him out of it, and then go grab his arms and sit. And, we were very big animal people. I will say the animals in our lives have helped our kids so much. Everybody has their own dog. We've got the horses. That's been a tremendous blessing. But but she was kind of in shock after it. She was traumatized, and she was somebody who had been up close and personal with us. And so the level of strangeness of all of this, I guess, for people in your lives is difficult, I have found, for most people to even handle and stay with you. Have you found? I guess you just
have you found good support in churches? Be honest. You don't have to name them, but has that been a struggle as well?
Yeah, it's really lonely. And I think part of it is, Kay, because in the church, there's such an environment of something's wrong. By golly, Jesus is going to fix it. And are they feeling better yet? Is everything okay now? And it's just like after the 100th time, you just get tired of saying, no, not everything's okay now. He has schizophrenia. And no. I mean, unless God does a miracle, which of course he could do. But that whole thing that hey, I'm so grateful for your voice. I feel like this idea that as Christians, if we were just spiritual enough, that somehow Christianity teaches we wouldn't experience these things. I've seen so many people suffer and have their faith just crumble because of those lies. And so I'm very grateful for the work that you do. And truly, I shudder to think, if you weren't doing what you're doing so faithfully in the midst of your tragedy, how alone so many people like us would feel, because there was no one that people would listen to saying, no, don't tell people it's not because they don't have enough faith.
That's right.
So
it's not a sin to be sick. It is not
a sin to be sick.
And Jesus has compassion on all who are ill. Well, I know one of the things that we've also talked about kind of related to that is self-care and the difficulty of finding and being able to nurture yourself in the middle of chaos and heartache and severe illness. So we're always, you and I, encouraging each other on that self-care. Your self-care is four-legged, right? And has a mane and tail. And
he runs really fast.
What does riding your old man, well, let's clarify. That's the horse I'm talking about. Okay. I couldn't think of his name. I just heard you call him the old man. Okay. Anyway, Kelly, tell us about your horses.
Well, I have to tell you, this is a true God story. When the first one who got sick and we were doing that, uncovering every stone to see what would help, we tried equine therapy for her. And it wasn't exactly the right fit, but there was something kind of magical about being around the horse for her. And then what I discovered was for me too. And so it's a very long, funny, goofy story, but kind of the bottom line is, out here at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, I met a stranger horse on the railing, and through this incredible series of events, God made him mine. And as an old lady, I learned how to ride a horse, and then I learned how to gallop a horse, and I have never been happier.
You need to follow Kelly on Twitter, just so that you can see her videos of her galloping on her horse across the Colorado Springs landscape. And it terrifies me every time, because I'm sure you're going to fall off, because it would be me right now. It gives you such...
I have fallen off.
You have? Oh, see, don't tell me.
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Oh, gosh. But you love it. I mean, it is therapy for you, right?
It is. I can't even explain how much it is. So whatever that is for you, whether that's gardening, or I love dancing. I know it sounds goofy,
not mine,
but
yeah.
Dancing my heart out and riding my horse as fast as he will go have been two things that have helped me tremendously. I will also say this to people. The strain of this has, don't be surprised if the strain of living through this life does things to you that you don't like. I will just tell you that I feel like I regressed in my spiritual life, and just, I think I've said this to you before, Kay, I just would have these recurring fantasies about wanting to run away to the mountains and be a gypsy and have no responsibilities. And just the pull to escape in any way, healthy, unhealthy, sinful.
Yep.
It's there because your life is hell.
Yeah.
And so just don't be surprised. And when you can go back to the self-care side of it and actually have a little compassion for ourselves in the midst of this, I would have been one of those people that thought that sounded like so goofy and not Christian, and I just needed to be meaner to myself. Yeah, that somehow being harsh to myself equaled being repentant. And I've just found the opposite to be true. And that's a great grace through all of this that I don't think I would have learned otherwise. So if you're listening and you feel just like discouraged because of what it's done to you, just know you're not alone either. And Jesus
you are
is
not
so merciful.
I think that that leads just perfectly to that we all need support as caregivers, as moms. We need care for ourselves. And there are some great support groups. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has free support groups, has their free 12-week family to family course that teaches family members about mental illness and how to begin to navigate and manage in your family. Grace Alliance has Grace Alliance, Mental Health Grace Alliance.org has some curriculum for family members, has some for people living with mental illness, but also for family members that I highly recommend. There are all kinds of online groups that people, really comfort each other and encourage you. Kind of like what we're doing right now is to just mostly say, you are not crazy. This is hard. It's really hard. And yes, it takes a toll. And yes, you do have to work really hard at building support around yourself. For me, I lined up some prayer partners when Matthew's illness was so severe. And I just thought, I'm going to go under. And I lined up, about 12 or 15 confidential people that I knew loved us, that they were going to keep what I shared in confidence. But I would then write an email every 10 days or whatever and just say, look, this is where we are today. Please pray for these specific things. And knowing that those people were faithfully, they loved my son, they loved us, they were going to pray, they were going to be on their faces for us, gave me such courage when I needed courage and strength. And so I think that's one of the things that maybe, because sometimes you and I've talked about this too, sometimes you don't have any more words to pray yourself. You have prayed all the prayers you know to pray. And so to know that other people are praying and holding you up is, it's a very tender thing, and it's been very sweet to me. So, and for me, I'm not a horse rider. I whole girly. I mean, just ridiculous. I love to look at horses, but I know someday you keep saying you're going to get me on a horse, and we'll see if that happens.
I am.
Oh, we'll see. You also said you're going to make me dance. That ain't happening. But,
I'm doing both. I get you dancing on a horse.
Oh, now that would be a sight to see. We need a picture of that. But for me, it is being in nature. I live near the ocean, and so sitting on the cliffs, looking at the ocean, just seeing the magnitude of what God has created. It sounds so simplistic, but for me, just watching the tide going in and out and seeing how large the Pacific Ocean is reminds me that the same God who created such beauty, who creates a world where in which the ocean, the tide goes in twice a day, is the same God who was looking out for me and for my family. It gave me a lot of comfort. So for me, nature, sleep. In fact, some of the things that I would say, I'd like to close with this, Kelly, is for us to just talk about, you've already said it a little bit, but some of the things that parents can do, maybe in the times when things aren't so chaotic with their kids. Maybe it's in one of those little periods where there's a little bit of relative peace and you kind of build into, the family during that time. I think one of the things that I want to say to parents is put down your phone. Put down your phone. Put down the stupid phone. Be with your family. Be with your kids. Studies have shown that kids are this particular generation, the kids born in the late 90s who have never known a day of their lives without Uber connectivity, who don't know what it's like to live without the internet or the cell phone or the iPad or the Kindle or all the different apps. They don't know what that's like. And the toll that is taking on these students, the increased loneliness, the increased sense of isolation, the increased depression, the increased major depressive episodes, the increased suicide attempts, the increased deaths by suicide. And they're more and more finding a connection for many kids to do with this connectivity and yet very, very isolated. Now, I'm not talking about schizophrenia or bipolar. Some of those serious mental illnesses can be exacerbated by those things, but they didn't create, none of those things created the brain illness. But in terms of making kids vulnerable or more vulnerable to suicidal thoughts, the connectivity on screens and social media is actually a bit deadly. And there's a book by Dr. Jean Twenge that'll come up on the screen called iGen. The book is iGen. Anybody who's got a kid 12 to 22, you need to read this book. It will help you understand these kids in ways that I didn't, because my kids are through that stage, but these are my grandkids. And so what I would just say that we can do as a protective factor in our families is to make sure that we eat at least one meal a day together. I don't care, pick your meal, but eat one meal together as a family. Put the phones down. Look each other in the eye. Listen to what your kids are saying. Listen when they're not talking. Listen to the things that their body language is telling you. When they tell you about their breakups or their bad grades, or they're worried about bad grades, or the competition at school, or their concern over college and can they get into the right one, and you listen to all those things, and there's the tendency from the adult viewpoint to say, oh, come on, don't be a drama king, don't be a drama queen, this is all temporary stuff, you got problems, you should be in my shoes trying to earn the money to take care of this family and buy you the stuff you want. The things that parents say sometimes, need to understand that to them, their problems are monumental. And when we listen, truly listen with empathy and compassion, and make that eye contact and let them know, as those things you were saying, we are with you and for you, and we will work this out together. We will find the help that you need. It goes so far in adding some of those protective layers that our kids need to survive in a world that is hostile and hard and often confusing. But if they've got that safe base at home, it can make such a difference. Any closing words that you would say just on some of the messages you tell your kids, or that you want to say to the parents that are listening?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more. I'm feeling very convicted because I am somebody who needs to put my phone down more. But I can't echo enough what you said. I'm probably one of those people who very naturally has a predisposition, when people say, my kids might say things, to respond the way that you did. 12 years ago, that would have been my predisposition. And I just can't say enough not to minimize, but to validate and to be empathetic with your kids. You just can't believe the difference that it will make. The other thing I will say is that, this journey of being a good Christian family sure turned out to be nothing like we had hoped. We went into this, Kay, we wanted to create this family for these kids who didn't have one. And we wanted, we watched Veggie Tales, and we were going to just, do all the things, all the Christian things. And instead, our lives have been full of hospitals and psych wards and the police and a lot of bad cuss words. And there's a grieving that comes from Absolutely. Losing what you imagined. But I have to tell you, for those of you out there feeling like that, it's because we were kind of sold a bill of goods, because the prize is Jesus, and it's being Jesus to our kids and being who he wants to have us become, and not this sort of idolatry of a perfect little American family. And so if you're grieving that, Kay, for a long time, I couldn't drive by a playground without being really emotional and just grieving like all what I thought was all the normal family stuff. And so I would just say to encourage you, let yourself grieve that. You have had a loss. This isn't what you wanted. This isn't what you expected. This isn't fair. It stinks. And so let yourself grieve that with the Lord, because he really cares. And that's been such a blessing, I would say, Kay. The biggest thing that has helped me has been to release an outcome of everything turning out the way I want it as what I'm living for. And instead to kind of finally surrender that what I want is to be happy in my interior life with Jesus. And I finally was like, I'm not going to live my whole life in misery. I can't. So I can't attach my well-being to the outcome. That's tough when you're a mom. Absolutely. But that is what I would say, if that's something in the downtime. And again, God's not a taskmaster. He's not harsh about any of this. He's so gentle and loving, and he's there. I would just say, if you can move in that direction, it will give you more peace and it will give you more joy. And then it makes handling the inevitable downs that come with parenting kids with mental illness. It's what he said, that in this life we will have trouble, but we can take heart. He's overcome the world, that he will never leave us and never forsake us. And
Thank you, Kelly.
Very imperfectly to hang on to.
Thank you, Kelly. I thank you for your friendship, and I thank you for being a courageous mom, and for being a compassionate mom, and for really a beautiful role model of not doing things perfectly, not doing everything right, but somebody who you've determined you're not going to walk away from your faith, even though some moments you have probably wanted to wave goodbye in the rearview mirror because it's so hard. But at the same time, your focus, I loved what you said about your focus is on Jesus and what he's trying to do inside of you and through you. And I love you, and I'm so glad to be with you. And I know our listeners have enjoyed being with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Love you.